Are you ready? Yes. Are you ready? For your left and
Hey guys, I just want to warn you before you watch. I'm traveling for work right now, and to conserve space, I didn't pack my filter. So my P's and B's might be a little rough. I hope you don't mind, and for first time watchers, I don't usually sound like this. Also, a few people have asked me to do a live Q&A. I'm not going to do a live one, because I probably won't have enough people tuned in during one specific time. That's why I didn't offer to do one for my 1K. But if you do have any questions for me, post them in the comments and I'll answer all of them in my next video. Also, there's an issue I need to address at the end of this video. So if you don't want to hear me blab, just skip to another video after the fourth story. Thanks. I'm a paralegal, female, and I've worked in a downtown area of a city in the south of about 1 million people, so I've gotten used to seeing crazy stuff happening from time to time. But this one really scared the crap out of me. I had just gotten off work and was walking the block to my car. 2 co-workers of mine had walked ahead of me by a couple of yards. As I stopped at my car, one of the co-workers, Z, a male, had a large popcorn machine in his car that I was borrowing, so I opened my trunk while waiting for him to pull up and put it in the trunk for me. The other co-worker, V, also a female, was continuing on to her car when she flagged Z down to give her a ride to her car, which was parked literally 1 spot away. Z thought she was joking, but she made a motion for him to look up the way, where there was a scruffy guy walking towards us, talking loudly to himself and carrying a huge, probably 6-foot-long chain that was about 3 inches around that he was slapping on the pavement as he walked. So V got into Z's car and rode with him the approximately 25 parking spots up to me. When they reached me, he jumped out, opened his truck, and practically threw the popcorn machine in my car while talking to the guy, who wanted a ride where he said Z's friend Charles was. Z was telling him he didn't know anyone by that name and jumped in his car, slamming the door, and started to take off. The crazy dude had opened Z's back door and was trying to get in as he was pulling off. Meanwhile, I'm scurrying back to my car. I jump in and immediately lock my doors. I'm watching the dude because I just want to get out of there, and he tried 3 times. He then goes to the front of my car and bends down like he's looking into the drain. That's when it went downhill. He jumped up and spun around, and that's when I saw how crazy he was. His eyes were pretty much glowing with cray-cray. He reached back with the hand he was holding the chain in and went to go slam the chain down on the hood of my car, but I had gotten the car in reverse and started backing out, with my eyes glued on his. Since I wasn't looking back, Z had driven around and pulled back in, blocking me in, but he was jumping out of the vehicle with his gun. Z and the crazy dude yelled at each other for a second. I have no idea what they said because even though I was still sitting in between them, my eyes were still glued to this crazy guy's eyes and my brain was in fight or flight mode. Z got back in his car and hightailed it out of there, and I noped right out of there too. But as I was pulling out, there was some other female coworker walking through the parking lot, and I didn't want to leave them alone with this guy. I called security and gave them a description of the guy. I then called 911 and did the same. The police department is 1 block away. My badass self thought I should yell at the guy that the police were on their way. In this way, the woman would know to hurry up and get out of there as well. So I yelled the cops were on the way. He jerked his head to look at me, yelling back that he didn't care and to fuck the police, yada yada, when his eyes just started doing the glowing crazy thing again. He reached back with his chain-wielding hand and ran full speed at my car, swinging the chain as he ran. That's when I noped out of there for good. Security told me that they never saw the guy by the time they got there, but the cops ended up catching him that night. Turns out the dude had been in town for a music festival, and his friends left without him. I can see why. Let's never meet ever again, crazy fucker.
I'm an 18-year-old girl in high school, and I've been dating this really amazing guy for about 5 months now. I'm not really sure how we started speaking because, quite honestly, he's one of the weirdest guys at our school. He doesn't have a lot of friends. I actually don't think he talks to anyone but me, and he always sits alone eating the same lunch. I'm not sure what his obsession is with BLTs, but he literally has one every day, and after he's done, he puts the wrapper back in his bag. Sometimes I catch him smelling it. It's kind of a weird quirk, but hey, who doesn't love bacon? So I've been dying to meet his parents for months now, but every time I try to, they always seem to have some sort of excuse as to why I can't come over. It's not like we're trying to make plans in the middle of the week, so after a while, I started to feel like they just didn't like me. If he had friends that weren't allowed to go over, I might feel better, but I don't even have that to go off of. But last Wednesday, he finally asked me if I wanted to come over for dinner that Friday. Of course I said yes. I spent the next 2 days psyching myself up and deciding what I was going to wear, what questions to ask, and how to answer all of their questions. I really wanted to impress them. So, when Friday night finally came, he picked me up around 6. I didn't know where he lived or what his house would look like. For some reason, I never thought to ask. I guess I just wanted to be surprised. It took us like 15 minutes to get to his house. I wasn't even sure if we were still in our hometown at first. He lived so far out in the boonies. I don't think I saw a house the entire last 5 minutes of our trip. Finally, though, we pulled into his very long dirt driveway, and at the end of it was a beautiful colonial house. Out back behind the house was a huge barn. I didn't see any farm animals, but it definitely looked like they kept it up. After the last few months of dodging even saying hello to me, I got to meet his parents. I thought they would be stuck up because his house was so well taken care of, and even though they weren't rich, they clearly enjoyed material things. His parents were honestly way more happy to see me than I thought they would be. I'm still not sure why they were so adamant about not having me over before, since they asked me a ton of questions. They wanted to know about my parents, siblings, friends. His mother even asked me about my diet and skincare. At this point, I'm unsure of what to expect for a meal until I see the familiar dish of pork tenderloin, served with Brussels sprouts and potatoes. After just a few bites, it's clear to me that this is a type of pork I've never had before, so I ask his mother how she made this pork. It was a little bitter, but absolutely delicious. When she answered me, I just sort of nodded and said, "Oh, but I honestly had never heard of that type of pig before. Does anybody know what a long pig is?"
Recently I found this subreddit and thought about a weird encounter that happened to me a few years ago. Just for some background, I'm a small female in my 20s. I've always been a little paranoid when it comes to strangers, so a lot of the time I'm freaking out over nothing. This was not one of those times. So, a few years ago, I was getting ready for a small get-together I was having at my house. It was the night before the party, and I realized that I needed to pick some chips and dip up. I decided that I had too much to do the next day, so I would go to the local Safeway that night. To understand the story, you have to understand the layout of the shopping center that the Safeway was in. There were many stores in it, with Safeway being to the left. There was a large parking area in front of Safeway, where customers would park/get their shopping carts. There were other areas of this parking lot, but no one who shopped at the Safeway parked in those areas. So back to the story. It's around 8:30 at night when I arrive at the Safeway. It's surprisingly crowded for that time of night, so I have to park towards the back of the Safeway parking lot. I finished shopping and started to walk out with my chips and a few other items in my shopping cart. As I'm walking to my car, I notice that a small woman is walking with a shopping cart towards my direction. That would not be weird itself, but she was walking from a desolate area of the parking lot that was never used for Safeway. It was like she was coming from the middle of nowhere. I told myself that I was just being paranoid and kept walking. I glanced over at the woman again. She was walking at a brisk pace, and it seemed to be directly towards me. My heart started to race, and I began to walk a little bit faster. A part of me was still thinking that I was just being paranoid, but she seemed so determined. I had arrived at my car and started to load the trunk when I saw that the woman was running towards me. I'm not exaggerating. She was sprinting directly at me. I went into survival mode. I slammed my car door and got in quickly. She arrived at my car just as I locked my doors. She started to yell at me in another language and shoved the shopping cart against my car. For a second, I thought that maybe she had an explanation for what just happened, and I just freaked out for no reason. But then, a large van pulled out of nowhere, and she jumped inside the van. She hopped in the van and they sped off in a different direction, leaving the shopping cart against my car. I don't know what they were planning on doing, robbing me or worse. All I know is that my sense of paranoia saved me from something very dark that day. So, this is a story that happened to me when I was somewhere around the age of 12 or 13. I believe it was my best friend Anna's 13th birthday, but I could be mistaken. Regardless, that puts the year that this happened around 2003 or 2004. I had known Anna since kindergarten. We had gone to elementary school together for several years, but then she moved to another side of town when her mom remarried, so we only saw each other on special occasions, when my mom would drive me across town to spend the night. Now, this house was a weird house. It was in a pretty upscale neighborhood, a gated community if I remember correctly, but the entire area outside of the immediate neighborhood was sort of shit. For reference, this is in the San Bernardino area of California. Beyond that, Anna's stepdad was a total creep. He used to make sexual references around all of us young girls, and I'm pretty sure he was physically abusive to my friend's mom. Not to mention, he was a generally unpleasant person. Just seemed to get angry at the drop of a hat. It helps give you an idea of the overall atmosphere of the household. Anyway, so cue the night of the birthday party. I always felt like the odd one out. Anna had made a ton of new friends at her middle school, and they all knew each other pretty well. There were about 10 of us in total, I think. So I had to try pretty hard to be involved in these sleepovers, or I'd end up in the corner alone. Early on in the night, while Anna's mom and stepdad were still awake, it was a typical birthday, cake, balloons, singing sort of party. Meanwhile, however, Anna's new friends were cooking up what we should all do when the parents went to bed. In excited whispers, some of the girls started telling me about how they invited 2 of the boys from their school to stop by around 1 a.m. They had promised to meet them at the side yard gate and let them in through the back door, so as not to draw the attention from Anna's parents. Both of the guys were super cute. They promised me, and I wouldn't be disappointed. We played it cool until Anna's parents went to bed a little before midnight, and then it became a waiting game. As the hours drew closer, the girls started debating who would go outside to meet the guys. It quickly became evident that although it had seemed like a good idea at the time, most of the girls were still a bit scared of going outside in the dark alone. Wanting to fit in and gain some respect from Anna's new friends, I volunteered to go. Anna agreed to join, as well as Brandy, who was the one who invited the boys to meet us in the first place. Quietly as we could, we opened the sliding glass door and crept into the backyard. I think it must have been a full moon because I remember it seemed super bright for 1 a.m. Anna's yard was pretty small and empty. We crept, giggling to ourselves, over the wooden side gate and peeked into the front yard. Someone was sitting on the curb. I remember I could see them quite clearly, despite the nearest streetlight being a couple houses away. They were facing away from us, hunched over with their knees pulled close to their body. It looked like they were waiting for something. Their hair appeared sparse and wispy, and they wore what looked like a gray wool suit. To top this strange sight, a small briefcase sat next to them on the curb. I was instantly overcome by a sinking feeling in my stomach. Something was not right. This was not one of the cute 13-year-old boys that had been described to me. That was certain. What felt like a long moment. No one said anything. We just stood and peered over the fence. Then I heard Brandy's voice ask me, speaking in a loud whisper so as not to alert Anna's parents. "Josh? Eric? Is that you?" For the briefest moment, I thought the stranger had not heard her. They remained with their back turned to us, facing the empty street. Then, slowly but deliberately, they twisted at the waist to stare directly at us. It became clear that it was a man, but much older than anyone we were looking for. His eyes were incredibly wide, almost circular, and the rest of his face was expressionless. But for a moment, we all stared. Then, the stranger rose to his feet and began walking towards us across the front lawn. But it was not a normal walk. Imagine someone power walking as fast as they possibly could without running, so that they look almost robotic. That's how he walked. Beside me, Anna managed a few words. "Oh my God, run." The three of us bolted for the sliding glass door at the back of the house, not daring to turn back to see if he was hopping the gate. We whipped it open, much to the alarm of the other girls, and fumbled with the lock behind us. There were no curtains to shield us from the dark backyard, so we dragged everyone in the kitchen and sat on the floor. There we described to the others what we had seen. "Are you sure it wasn't just Josh playing a trick on you?" one of the girls asked skeptically. "Positive," Brandy replied. She started to say something else, but her words were cut short. Several of the girls shrieked. Someone was at the front of the house, pounding on the large living room window. Not knocking, mind you, but pounding. They were obviously hitting the window full force. "What do they want?" one of the girls whispered. None of us knew. After the third set of knocks, there was a long and very tense silence. I think most of us were terrified he would hop the gate and come around to the sliding door, which, aside from being uncovered, was fairly easy to unlock. After a couple minutes of silence, Anna leaped to her feet. "I'm going to get my stepdad," she declared. Several of us worked up the courage to follow her to the front of the stairs, despite it being so close to the front door and the window, both which thankfully had curtains. Her stepdad was already standing at the top of the stairs, totally perplexed, with her mom lurking behind him. "What the hell are you girls doing?" he asked. All at once, we clamored to explain that there was a strange man outside, that he had been sitting on the curb but ran at us when he saw us, and that just now he had been pounding on the window. "I'm getting my gun," the stepdad said, and he emerged a few minutes later with a shotgun in hand. We all waited with bated breath as he unlocked the door and stepped out front. There were a few moments of silence as he looked around, and then he came back inside and locked the door behind him, clearly annoyed. "There's no one out there. Now keep it down. I've got to work in the morning." There was no arguing with him, but needless to say, none of us slept much that night. By the following morning, some of the girls were trying to justify it, speculating that one of the boys must have invited or sent a family member as a prank. But that just never made sense to me. No normal, middle-aged, elderly man would agree to terrorize a bunch of little girls, unless he was already a twisted motherfucker to begin with. Years later, I made the connection that we were incredibly close to Patton State Hospital, as in within reasonable walking distance, which is a pretty massive mental institution, but I don't know if there were any escapes that year. The most reasonable explanation that I had is it was someone on drugs, I suppose. But it was terrifying, no matter what they were, especially considering the suit and the briefcase getup. What was up with that? Following that night, I don't recall ever spending the night at Anna's again, but I think it was more because her stepfather was a dick, and my mom just didn't want me around him anymore. Anna's mom and stepfather divorced a few years later, and Anna moved out of state. I never saw any of our friends again, and while we've kept in touch, we don't talk much about our childhood, and we've never discussed what happened that night. I've always thought about bringing it up, but I'm also too worried it might bring back other painful memories of everything that went on with our stepfather at that time, so I don't know if that would be appropriate. Anyway, thank you guys for taking the time to read this. It was interesting to type out, as I've only ever told it out loud before, and very rarely. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed Sooth Siren. I think you'll be seeing her a lot more in the community. So go on over to our page and subscribe. Tell her I sent you in the comments and let her know what you think of her channel. There's a link to her channel in the description. I hope you visit her. So in my last video, I was lucky enough to have my favorite narrator, Your Maker, take part in my 1K special. This was a favor on his part, and I'm honored and thankful. I'm thankful to everyone that participated. Joe even sent an extra story. Unit 522 sent me his story with the quickness. I just have one issue with a commenter, whose comment I deleted and I blocked them from commenting again. I usually wouldn't, but I felt as if they were sent and insulted my co-narrators with a specific motive. All I have to say is if you want to compliment a narrator, do so. If you feel like you need to insult and put down my amazing co-narrators in order to make just one of them have their moment, what the fuck does that say? Numbers don't lie. I don't even know how many subs Your Maker has now, but it's hundreds of thousands. Not only is his channel a success, but he's one of the coolest narrators I've talked to. I'm using him as an example because he has the most subs, and it's just silly to criticize somebody that clearly knows what he's doing. Joey's my best friend and spends so much time on his work, worrying. Don't come on my page and start insulting my friends. Why would anyone come on my page and watch an entire 40-minute video that they don't like? Unless A, they were sent to my page to start shit or fish for compliments, or B, jealous in some way of somebody in the video. I had a hunch, and when I saw this person's interactions, it was pretty much confirmed. It actually made me laugh at first because of how stupid it sounded, but then I realized how fucking rude it was. They also claimed narrators don't listen to people or their subs, blah, blah, blah. Except, of course, X. All of these people that I narrated with regularly answer their subs, take their critiques seriously, and adjust their channels for their viewers' pleasure. For fuck's sake, I had just answered their first comment right away. You know why some people have to put people down to make themselves look like the best? Because they have to create the illusion of them being on top in order to sleep at night. That's what I have to say.